I mean, no, because for me, the idea of a film is like there's like this formal aspect of a film. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It's a film. You go to a cinema, you watch it, and which is fine. But what I was really interested in with that project is to break through that, and because I want this thing to work on the internet. I want it to work in cinema. I want it to work as sort of like a graffiti. It's like taking, you know, I mean, the way that graffiti works in life is an artist goes and he spray paints a wall or a car or a street or whatever, and it's like he puts his mark on reality, and then his artwork becomes part of this environment. So I'm really interested in having the film become part of the environment, because it's a deconstruction of kind of a well-known film that was made about the situation in Louisiana. So I just, instead of making a movie in Louisiana, I just wanted to make a movie about making a mark in history. I mean, a movie, I'm calling it. I fell into that trap. Making something which is a mark on this history, on this place. And it's not really a movie formally. It's kind of it's like an action. It's like a Jackson Pollock kind of painting. I mean, I thought about that piece for like, when I was thinking about it, I thought about it for 3 months. And I sat down, and in 1 week I finished it, you know, and it was basta, it's done. It was like an action thing, you know, but it's like, I just wanted to get it done. So for me, I don't want to categorize it as a film. I want to categorize it as a sort of an action. So I use the word graffiti. Maybe it's not a good word, but it's like an action painting, you know. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually painting on it with very ugly video images and you know, just using the ugliness of what the computer can do in a very simple way on these black and white images, and to sort of create this kind of contemporary kind of feel to it, which is the feel of what we see when we're on the computer, for instance. Because the colors on the computer and on the internet are really kind of ugly, you know. The graphics, the colors they use and the way they use them. So I just wanted to play with those ideas. It's the only one that I know of that was done in this in Louisiana, and it's a story. Look, I mean, there's so many reasons why. BP is an oil company that bought Standard Oil. Standard Oil financed this film. The film was made in 1946, I think. The original film was made about the oil industry, financed by the oil industry. It's a propaganda film for the oil industry. Extraordinarily, this film is on, I think it's on a list of 100 important films in America, in Washington. I mean, the film illustrates, the film that Flaherty made illustrates how the system will take something, and it's the corporate system we're talking about here. You know, we're talking about the Rockefellers, you know, the most wealthy people in the world, in the history of the world, manipulating artists and manipulating reality so that it suits their needs. So it's the only film that I can possibly think of, you know, doing it, because it's, again, the film is made by Flaherty. Flaherty was an artist, I believe, and he's made some great films. And my favorite film of his is Manavaran, made on, I think it's an island off the coast of Ireland. It's an extraordinary film. But this film is a far cry from that film. But the other thing is that Flaherty made Nanook of the North. Nanook of the North, I believe, was financed by a company, a French company that makes furs, that made fur coats. So I'm not saying that Flaherty is necessarily morally in a wrong place, because you have to get money to make your films. And I don't know enough about the story to really make a judgment call. But if he's getting money from the fur industry to make this film in this famous film that he made called Nanook of the North, and then he's getting money from the oil company to make this film about the oil industry in Louisiana, there is something interesting to explore here as an artist, you know, a filmmaker in this time that we're living in, with all these incredible tragedies going on and ecological tragedies going on. So yes, I mean, you know, for me, it's like a great choice. We live in this sort of situation right now where, for filmmakers who are independent, and I'm not talking about, you know, like big Hollywood films or big French films that are financed by the system. I'm talking about probably, you know, like 85% of filmmaking, you know, is you know, filmmakers make movies, and in a way it's kind of easy to make a movie, you know, I mean, in terms of you can make a movie. You know, I'm not saying it's easy to make a good movie, but you make a movie. But the difficult part is not making the movie. The difficult part is, where do you show these films? You know, what is open in the world for these kind of films? What cinemas are open? Where can these films play? This is the real problem, and this is dominated by the corporate system, dominated by companies that really don't care about anything but making huge amounts of money, and they'll do that with the easiest kind of product, because the idea is that there's a term in English, the lowest common denominator. Most commercial art, you know, whether it's music or cinema or whatever's made for the public, television, is made for the lowest common denominator. It's for the stupidest people, you know, and the companies like that because it's safe. Well, by making cinema into this kind of into this kind of like lowest common denominator kind of art for the masses, they've slowly sort of eliminated the cinemas. They've made the place where people can watch movies it's very difficult for filmmakers to get into those places. So you need film festivals like this. But I love film festivals because they're great, but I think it's really dangerous to only have that kind of place for your films. So there's a war in my mind, and you have to fight it, you know. No, absolutely. The only difference is that, you know, I mean, I like Dziga Vertov's work. He's from eastern part of Poland, and he changed his name and he became Dziga Vertov. But the thing is that he was making propaganda films for the Soviet system, which is, okay, they believed in the dream, right? Now, that whether it was a sophisticated dream or a realistic dream or a political dream or whatever kind it is, that's okay, because humanity has the dream. And by making propaganda films for the Soviet system, obviously he believed in something, and he dedicated his art to this, to helping humanity become something better. Now, obviously the Soviet system failed, you know, and it's not his fault because he was there in the beginning, but if you're making propaganda, then it's kind of dangerous, you know what I mean? So this was the early part of cinema. I think they were very enthusiastic about this new cinema, new political situation, fighting essentially the right-wing elements. But at this point, I think that we have to do it a little bit differently. You know, I think that we cannot say that, okay, we cannot embrace left-wing or right-wing politics. We have to sort of find another way to do that, and that's what I'm interested in doing. Well, no, I mean, in terms of methods, he deconstructed cinema, and he reconstructed montage, editing, this kind of thing. I mean, you know, what he did was pretty amazing, as did Eisenstein. But I think that now we have to sort of deconstruct again, because, you know, in the last 20 years, last 25, 30 years, in a lot of ways, the techniques of cinema has gotten more and more conservative, because there is this pressure from the corporate system to make something that's like palatable. So the problem is that if you come up with an idea that's kind of cool, they will buy you, and your idea then becomes like part of the way the system works. So I'm like investigating how to deconstruct the whole storytelling method so that it's not cool. It's interesting, but it's not cool, and they're not going to take my methods. I'm sort of fighting the coolness factor. You know, like for instance, when MTV started, they had this thing called frames per minute, or I'm sorry, cuts per minute, and then it became cuts per second. You know, boom, boom, boom. It's all artificial to keep this, you know, this fucking rhythm going, so that the audience is watching this thing. They're not really interested, but it keeps this tension going, you know. So I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. I want to sort of deconstruct how a story is being told, and do it in my own kind of way, so that you look at the idea of storytelling in a different way. Because I think it's sort of time for that. So like CameraWar is kind of a way to do that, where you can watch the chapters in different ways, and over time. And every time you look at it, you know, and like you look at chapter 14 first, then you look at chapter 1, then you look at the end of chapter 18, et cetera, another story gets told, and you're kind of deconstructing reality, and you're kind of looking at things in a different way as a viewer. But you're not looking at it in terms of information, you're also looking at it aesthetically, you know? So you're kind of getting a deconstruction of reality, so that you can understand it in ways that is only good for you personally, you know? So that you understand, like for instance, if you're a trained scientist, you'll look at it one way. If you're like a student, you'll look at it another way, but you'll always have these interpretations. So the important thing is to question the reality that's going on, you know? And not to have the films be like a package. That this is how you think, or this is how you're entertained. You know, so it's a deconstruction thing. So that project was like a 1-year project experiment, and I learned a lot from that. Because what happened is that, you know, like as a filmmaker, you know, you raise money, and you finally get your money, and then you have the pressure from television, et cetera, and you kind of forget to experiment, you know, because you're happy to make your film. But with that project, I started experimenting with music, cutting things, taking sound down when somebody's talking. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Not caring if the image is good or not, you know, overlighting, shooting with a telephone, shooting with a still camera, all kinds of techniques, playing with music, and sort of really having fun with it, so that I arrive to something, and then I say, now I'm looking at it and say, well, listen, I learned this. Let me try these techniques in a bigger film that I want to make, which I'm making now. But I think it's good to have fun, with this, with cinema, you know. And I consider, even though it's on the internet, I still consider it cinema. It's a new kind of cinema. Yeah, I'm making a film now that I've been shooting for like 2.5 years, almost 3 years. The film is about how Poland, and Poland is an example of the bigger problems that are going on in the world, how Poland is being purchased by Western corporations, by multinational corporations, and being chopped up into little pieces. And essentially what they're doing is they're producing things in Poland, and they're with Polish people. They are creating consumers, and they are because it's a relatively wealthy country. There's a huge population there of 35+ million people who are ready consumers. They want to consume something new. So these corporations have come into Poland, and they're doing something there, which is quite insidious. So I found some farmers that I'm working with in Poland in order to illustrate this, and I'm connecting it to a new political party in France called Europe Ecology, because it's a party that doesn't believe in left or right. It believes that the only way to change the world now is through ecological means. And Danny Cohn-Bendit, Danny the Red, who was like a big figure in '68 in France, he's part of this party, so he's in the film. As is José Bové, the famous French farmer who destroyed McDonald's, you know, he's an activist now. And Eva Joly, who's a lawyer. She's a Norwegian lawyer who lives in France, and she's an extraordinary person. She knows how corporations work. So so it's like several stories brought together into one, and it's an experiment. And I think that by looking at the farmers in Poland, the way the film is going to look at them and connecting them with this Western European way of dealing with politics will create kind of another way to look at something that's going on. So it's kind of, I'm being a little evasive because I'm still creating it. So I can't tell you everything about the story, but this is the parameters that I'm working with.